for, they asked us to take a look at some of the crime that's been happening and what we might be able to do about it. We decided to invite the people who know best. And so we've invited Charles Allen, our council member, and Lt Megan Mulrooney, who was recently promoted to lieutenant in our area. And I thought what we could do, and please, council member and lieutenant, you know, if this doesn't work for you, you'll let us know, but have you each kind of talk a little bit about what things look like from your perspective, why we might be seeing some of the things that we're seeing, and you know, some of the things you might already be aware of that will be of concern to older adults in our community. And yeah, if you're not speaking, if you can put yourself on mute, that would be helpful. We have a lot of folks and we don't want to get a lot of background noise. And then we'll open it up for questions because I know folks have some questions. Does that sound like a reasonable plan? Okay.
Sure.
All right. Well, with no further ado, I will turn it over to Councilmember Allen. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening.
Absolutely. Thanks, Judy. And good evening to everybody. And Lieutenant Mulrooney, thank you very much. I know Lieutenant Mulrooney is our watch commander tonight and is in leadership in the 1st District. Commander Bryant is actually at another public safety meeting tonight. Otherwise, she'd be here as well. But I checked in with her earlier today too. But Lieutenant, we really appreciate you taking the time out tonight. I can talk broadly about on a couple of fronts, and then Judy, I'm looking forward to the questions and being able to help answer a lot of those. I would say across the city, I'd say across the whole.
Great expression.
I can't hear Charles. Is anybody else?
Nope.
Oh, it looks like we lost him. Maybe
I'm not hearing him either.
yeah, Lieutenant, do you want to speak? I think it sounds like maybe the council member's internet is having problems. Okay. Oh, there you are again, Charles. Okay, good.
Sorry about that. My computer froze and dropped off. If it happens again, I will run up and restart the router just in case, but apologies. So I talked on for like 10 minutes there with some really amazing things, and I realized you didn't hear any of it. So let me start over. So again, I appreciate Lieutenant being here. So I'm looking forward to help answer questions. I'll try to walk through a couple of the points as I see them, and then really look forward to the conversation tonight. So a couple of things. We have seen in particular the last couple of years, not just in the district, but actually our entire region. So this is our neighbors in Maryland, our neighbors in Virginia, and of course we've seen this across the whole country, but an increase in gun violence. We have seen an increase in armed carjackings in particular. I think those are two of the main areas that we've been concerned about and seen, but we've also of course seen robberies and many other issues. As we think about this past year, if you were to look, I always think stats they're a double-edged sword because the stats can help tell a story, but they also can be misleading from the things are going down and getting better, but you are the victim of a crime, or crime happens on your block or to someone you know, well then crime just went up for you. And so the stats don't really mean anything. But we do tell the stats. I always throw that caveat because it's important to help kind of frame that. This winter, January, February, March, I think, and most people I think would agree, we saw a dramatic increase, armed carjackings in particular, but we saw things that were deeply troubling. And the district was not unique. We were seeing this across the entire region. We were seeing this in Montgomery County, in Prince George's County. We were seeing it in Virginia. And I think what it really did, I think, is actually push in a good way. The district partnered in much stronger ways regionally. So for example, MPD, the chief, created a carjacking task force that created really strong strategic work with Prince George, with partners in Virginia. And that absolutely had an impact. It absolutely had an impact in helping close cases, being able to identify individuals. Are still happening. We have seen a decrease from that high that we had seen in those winter months. I know when I talk with Commander Bryan in the 1st district, and remember your police districts don't perfectly match ward boundaries, but for the most part, the 1st district maps pretty well with Ward 6. She had told me 1st district has the highest closure rate in the city at one point this year, which is excellent. That means that the officers and detectives are doing good work. And had really started to see things come to a better place. That again, just one is one too many. I think there's also sometimes what happens is the length of time that it takes from when a act of violence or a criminal act takes place, and then when we see either an arrest or the accountability is often fairly long. And I'll use an example that probably most of us can remember. And I think it shows you the really hard work that goes into closing a case. But most of us here are going to remember in the springtime when there was an armed robbery of the dry cleaner at Lincoln Park. Brazen daytime armed robbery. Somebody that many of us have used that dry cleaner for a long time, deeply disturbing to a lot of folks. A couple of weeks ago, so now it's many months after the act took place, charges were filed against an individual, so arrest was made. They did, this is where MPD partnered with ATF, partnered regionally, and really were able to actually use forensics information in a really deep and meaningful way. So during that armed robbery, the suspect dropped his mask. Being able to use that forensics evidence is crucially important, and that was actually one of the ways they linked that case. Now, I find this is something that I think the city should take as constructive criticism. The crime stats, the report of a crime taking place, we blast that out all the time. We don't, as a city, do a great job actually of helping close the loop and let people know when an arrest has been made or when that case has been closed. For example, because I knew it was a hot topic for a lot of people, I'd shared information about that arrest for that individual, that suspect with the armed robbery at the dry cleaner. And the number of people that wrote back to me that came back and said, thank you, like so glad to know that that had a resolution and to understand the process it takes to get to that. I think that's, for me, it's one of the things I think I want to keep talking to the city and talking with all of our partners around how do we help make sure people feel that loop get closed so that you understand, frankly, the hard work that goes into it, but then when an arrest is made. And of course, there's more that comes after that. Just because an arrest is made does not mean a conviction, does not mean all the other pieces. So there's multiple steps to this. Big picture though, the city is, you have probably heard me say this many, many times, and I'm gonna keep saying it. The city is really pushing hard on what I push on and talk about as a both and strategy. I think within the space of public safety, it is very easy to fall into corners where we kind of get into either or. I really believe that our solutions will be found in a both and I think the hard work that's been going on the ground in communities across the city over the last many months really shows what that both and can look like. And that means having law enforcement be able to do their job, be strategic and focused, and investing in violence prevention, violence interruption, and the other efforts to try to help stop cycles of violence. And those two efforts paired together, and I feel like if you look at the last 6 months, you've seen a stronger partnership and pairing of those efforts than you have before, I think also help yield dividends. We have a program in the district, for example, where we identify individuals that are at risk of either committing violence or being victims of violence, or the reality is often both at the same time. And we're able to, it's called the Pathways program. It's a deeply intensive program where about 25 people at a time are essentially gotten off the street, brought in, receiving mental health counseling, job training, housing support, and really try to focus in on the needs and the risks. These are individuals who are making a choice, which is the really important first step, to leave that life. Almost every single person there has had some touch with a criminal history, with violence. They've been victims of violence themselves. And the success rate of that program, I think, gets people into stable employment, the type of supports they need. It is the rate of reoffending of that population is dramatically lower than you see in other populations. And so it shows us that we can have success when we bring really targeted strategic efforts, and we can really identify who it is that we need to really focus our energy on to help stop that. That said, the city still isn't doing nearly enough, still isn't doing it as urgent enough. For those folks who may be in the northeast part of Ward 6, it's right on the border of Ward 6 and Ward 7, but we had a series of gunshots going back and forth over around 16th Street. And that's right on the border of 2 police districts and 2 wards, but we were working with, and we'd been on the ground at the exact spot of the shooting with MPD, with partners, really trying to focus in on what was going on. And I think we all knew that it was very likely related to a conflict that was happening between 2 individuals or 2 sets of individuals. And even with all the work going into that, we were unable to stop the gun violence took place that took a life. So we know we still have a lot of work to do and a lot of hard work to do to be able to really change that dynamic. But the investments are there. We are not a resource poor city when it comes to the investments we're making. It's about the coordination. And if I'm looking for my bright spot, it really is the last 6 months of seeing a level of coordination and strategic planning and partnership that I think takes us to where we got to go, and is so much improved than where we were a year ago at this time. And it's a credit to a lot of partners that have helped push in that direction. So Judy, I could keep on going for a while, but I want to respect time, and I want to make sure we save plenty of time to help answer questions. So how about I stop there, and then happy to dive in with everybody throughout.
Yeah. How about if we get some comments from Lieutenant Mooney, and then some things that you've seen, and then we'll open it up for questions. How about that?
Sounds great. So actually, I'll start off with sharing some good news. Today up on H Street, we had a misdemeanor sex assault where someone grabbed someone's butt, and a burglary just down the street in the unit block of K. We were able to get on scene in time, form perimeter around K Street, got the subject out, placed him under arrest, recovered everyone's property, and it turned out he was the same individual from that misdemeanor sex assault. So he was placed under arrest and taken off the street today successfully. In terms of our crime recently, I'm sure you've all seen and heard, we have had an increase in robberies. Now, the good and bad news of this is that some of the places where we've had those increases now are a lot safer, and we're not having those same issues. So the Eastern Market 8th Street corridor, we did have one recent robbery. However, there was a suspect arrested in, I want to say February or March, who's actually responsible for a lot of them. So a lot of those are closed, and that area sort of calmed down in terms of robberies. The Navy Yard area, we've previously had issues, but we just implemented a new crime plan, which I'll talk a little bit about. And the H Street corridor, we've had a recent issue, but I will tell you too, with those, that at least 5 of our recent robberies were all connected in the same spree in the same night. The other issues I know we've been having are package thefts. I mean, for some of you, I'm sure that the package thefts actually impact you more than the robberies, because that's what you see day to day, the thefts from cars and the thefts of vehicles. So let me just address our robbery plan first. We're doing a very similar plan in the H Street corridor and in the Navy Yard. One thing we have is that we have actually reinstituted, made sure we have a curfew ban. For those of you who don't know, there's an actual curfew for juveniles 16 and under in DC. They're not locked up, they're not in trouble. Basically, you pick them up after, I believe it's midnight during the summer. It's different during the winter, but we pick them up, we bring them home to mom, we deliver them right to their mother. After the curfew time, they are off the street and not doing anything misbehaved or getting hurt themselves. So it's actually kind of a very peaceful way to prevent crime. I've actually, once you start doing the curfew, and I've actually had juveniles come up just be like, hey, can you just take me home? It's past curfew, like I want to ride. This was actually the case where we picked someone up for curfew one night, and the next day during the day, he actually was responsible for hitting somebody in the head with a brick and trying to rob them. So the kids that we're seeing out after that curfew are frequently the kids that are committing the crimes. However, taking them home to their mother is a much less law enforcement involved way of dealing with it. We're preventing the crime by removing them from that situation where they could get themselves in trouble and giving them back to a responsible parent. That kid actually was arrested, the one that tried to rob the lady, and he actually currently is a stay away from the entire District of Columbia. So that's an example of things going well. He actually lives in Maryland with his dad. The other thing we're doing is we're really emphasizing environmental factors. So the officers are driving around, checking at night to make sure we have street lights still on, that we don't have foliage covering up street lights that could create a dangerous atmosphere. We're also focusing on warning people if we see them. A lot of these carjackings, unfortunately, it's stuff we do all the time. I mean, even right now for me, it's usually people that are in their car, talking on their phones, their loved ones, or in one case, eating ice cream, like totally normal stuff we all do. And they're just looking down distracted for a second, and someone takes advantage of that. Like I said, fortunately, the last couple of weeks, we have had a decrease in the Navy Yard area and H Street. We're working on stabilizing. We haven't had any since we started implementing our newest crime plan. The other thing that we're focusing on is identifying people of interest that essentially are committing multiple crimes. For example, we actually were able to capture and arrest an individual who had burglarized 8 businesses in the Northeast, Southeast area over here. So he's under arrest, and he actually warrants from 3 different jurisdictions. In terms of our theft from the autos, the tire thefts, I'll tell you, are a citywide issue. I was previously a detective in the 6th district, or a detective sergeant, and I will tell you that they're frequently connected. We have a specific detective, Michael Dowling, that's actually just assigned to the tire thefts here. So he's specifically working all the cases. But it's a citywide issue. You have small groups of people that are committing the crimes. So I personally have my officers out there looking for them. I know we have a red pickup truck as a lookout right now. That's currently the one we have. Previously, there was a silver Nissan sedan, but they're very fast, unfortunately. It's usually a group of 3 to 4 people. They don't actually have jacks or tools. They come, pick the car up, take the wheels off, put it down, and get in the car. And I know we have 2 different groups of those. One is actually leaving the cars in yellow crates. The other is leaving them on the ground. Like I said, our detective division is specifically assigned a detective for each district to just investigate those and to make sure that we're following up on that. The stolen autos, unfortunately, a lot of it is, and again, in an ideal world, we should be able to leave our cars running unlocked, but we have people that are running around, they see a car that's open, unlocked, they hop in and they take the car home. Now, the nicer side of that is we actually recover 96% of those cars. It's extremely rare we don't recover the cars from the hop-ins. They're usually recovered down in Southeast, on the other side of the Anacostia, but that's the biggest auto thefts we're having. Somebody running in to pick their food up that they ordered for curbside, leaving the car running with the keys in it. Somebody running in the house because they forgot something. Somebody heating their car up in the winter, cooling it down in the summer. And again, you should be able to do that, but because we have these people that are taking the property, unfortunately, in order to safeguard your property, I wouldn't recommend it. I think that's mostly what, oh, the other thing we're doing is we are actually working with Uber to start having those notifications pop up for the Uber Eats drivers to tell them like, hey, lock your car, be safe, look around you. And I've also reached out to Facebook and referenced things like Facebook Marketplace, and we're trying to work with them to make Facebook Marketplace exchanges safer. I think that's what I've got. Other than that, I can open up to questions. That's kind of a general overview of where we're at right now.
Well, great. Thank you so much. We do have one question. I'm going to ask folks to either put your questions in the chat and I will try to read them, or if you want to ask your question, and you're welcome to, please use your hand raise, which you will find in your reactions. If you hover over either the top or the bottom of your screen and you find reactions, you should have a raise hand. And the reason for that is I can't see everybody on one screen, but the raise hand will pop you up to the top of the screen so we can see that you have a question. There's one question in the chat and there's one question that was sent in advance. So why don't we start with those? So I will read the question in the chat so everybody can hear it. It says, please address homeless people who have become more aggressive, waving canes, asking for money by the market and in front of Trader Joe's. Unpleasant to walk around the neighborhood. And the second part of this is there's a homeless man on 7th Street South and C Southeast who has spread his belongings for half a block. He bathes in the splash pad in front of the Hine Apartments.
I can jump in on that one to start with. Let me, I guess, address the second part of the question first. I actually just a few hours ago went by 7th and C, and the gentleman wasn't there at that time, nor were his belongings, but I am very well aware of the person that we're talking about and have seen that myself. I think, without knowing this individual personally, we're talking about an individual who has got some pretty significant mental health and behavioral health challenges. I had been working with the mayor's office trying to get our homeless outreach teams to go out, engage, and eventually get this person to go into safe and stable housing. That is our ultimate goal here. That is going to take, again, some time to keep working on that. I know that some of the businesses have actually been helping him have, fresh water or things like that to try to kind of check in. I will also say that I'm trying to be careful about sharing personal information. The individual has direct family members that live in our community. And so they also are trying to work with him as well. So I absolutely know who you're speaking about. And I just want you to know there are a lot of efforts going, trying to help get that individual into safe and stable housing. And I see the note about thank you for the splash park. That is a space that cannot be there. So we'll continue to work with the mayor's homeless outreach team to keep working in that space. In terms of overall individuals experiencing homelessness, this is obviously something we've continued to work on. Part of what, as the legislative branch, we don't run the agencies, but part of what we've done is try to create the tools necessary to help move individuals into housing, move more and more individuals into housing, as well as to have the type of support services that go around that. Often as we call that, you may hear the phrase permanent supportive housing. So that means pairing housing with the supportive services around it so that the individual, could be mental health, could be behavioral health, could be many other issues. How do we help make sure we're trying to address that? And so we continue to work with the mayor's team to get that and move people in. We are not allowed to just force someone out of public space. And so it does take work to go in there, build the relationship, build the trust, and then be able to bring that person in. There has been some success with that, but we also know that we saw over the last 2 years, a dramatic increase during the pandemic of individuals that left shelter space and moved into public spaces. That was both in encampments and in other spaces, largely because, of course, the shelters became spaces where COVID was spreading so quickly. So we saw a dramatic shift in that. And that's taken a pretty significant amount of resources and coordination trying to address getting those individuals in. So that's the kind of the quick answer on that. I don't know if Lucinda, you had anything else to add to that, but that's kind of where we are.
I can take the law enforcement side. So we could go out and we could arrest everyone out there for aggressive panhandling. But at the end of the day, one, they're all going to be citationed out pretty much immediately. So as soon as they're locked up, they're going to be right back out there. And it's not actually addressing the root of the issue, which is a significant number of those experiencing homelessness are also experiencing a mental health crisis. One thing I've personally tried to really emphasize with my officers in the roll calls is talking about deflection. Deflection is the process of when we get these calls for perhaps someone aggressively panhandling, trying to sit down and talk with them and work with them and look into DC Health Matters to see if there's some resources that we can try and connect them with. Obviously, some people are not in a space where they're able to receive those resources because they're not there at this time. Because of their mental health issues, they're not in a place where they are able to let themselves be helped. However, another issue, we do sometimes get calls where a crime occurred. someone's wallet gets stolen and the person feels bad and doesn't want to press charges. And in that case, if you're not willing to give us your info or not willing to give us your information, but we aren't really able to do much with that. At that point, we don't have a victim. We don't have your info, and we only have the word of the person who's mentally ill against yours, and you're not actually telling us what happened after you called. So in that case, there's not much we can do on the police end. We need cooperation in order to actually go forward with those smaller crimes. Like I said, we are aware. Some of my officers have actually been working to build up rapport with those who are experiencing homelessness, because we are seeing the same couple of people over and over again, especially in places like Eastern Market, places like H Street. So I'm really working with the officers to try and help them funnel these individuals more toward a social solution, because the police solution of making the arrest gives them a criminal record that could prevent them from getting jobs and doesn't actually get them off the street and prevent the aggressive behavior. So we are trying, and if there's an instance where someone is threatening you, obviously we are going to make that lock up. But if it's just that they're panhandling outside a store, we could arrest them for aggressive panhandling, but we do try and look at the bigger implication for that individual and if this individual is having those mental health issues.
Thank you for that response. We have a number of people have questions. I'm going to ask one that has that I know a lot of people in our community are concerned about. We have a very active community of people who enjoy walking, and there are a number of things that make walking dangerous. Vehicles not stopping at red lights and stop signs, not yielding to pedestrians. And older people, I think, are particularly vulnerable to this. Some of us might be a little bit slower. Some of our hearing might not be as good. And so just want to know about, and then this would include, unlicensed mopeds, the ATVs, the motorized bicycles, as well as cars and trucks. So I wonder if you can address that. How can we make pedestrians safer? Is there a law enforcement component to this?
So with the ATVs, we actually have a whole unit right now that's just dedicated to dealing with ATVs. One issue for us, we have a pretty strict chase policy. So in general, we're not going to chase ATVs, partially because, frankly, it frequently can end in the death of the ATV rider because they're not very protected on that vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the other stuff, frankly, I'm totally open if somebody is having an issue at a specific location. If they send me an email, I am perfectly willing to have one of my officers go and specifically deal with that location. There's a lot of research that having traffic stops in a specific area, even if it's not necessarily related to the one block, actually has a diffusion effect where it positively impacts the areas around it instead of just dispersing the crime or dispersing the improper behavior. It actually promotes in a larger area law abidingness. So if there is a specific area that's a problem, like full disclosure, I'm generally on midnights, so we don't have quite as many cars out. But I'm happy to arrange to have somebody from our traffic, like our officers that do a lot of traffic, go to an area, focus on it, and make it known that this is not a place that we can offend.
Okay, thank you.
And again, if I can add just a little bit to that, Judy, yeah, I think the lieutenant was sharing also about obviously the MPD's no chase policy. In addition to, as she said, the risk to the individual, we also see that there's a very significant risk when a chase actually heightens the recklessness of the driving, and so now pedestrians and others become even more at risk already. So I think that's why MPD has that policy and has a rationale behind that. MPD does, however, so just so everybody is aware, MPD has been able to confiscate many an ATV and dirt bike. I don't want to spoil what may be happening down the line, but I'll just say there's, I believe, a collection of them being made that you may see at some point. Anyway, the overall, though, traffic safety is an issue that I think goes partly with the traffic enforcement side of things, and that can be both MPD, and we also been having a conversation around is that the best use of the police officers' time, and do we want to see about how can you have DDOT or other enforcement agencies be able to have a role to play in traffic enforcement, but also the way in which we prioritize our DDOT efforts. You know, we have passed, for example, a comprehensive omnibus Vision Zero Act 2 years ago that has yet to be implemented. And it would address a whole host of areas about safety in intersections, safety on streets, crossing speeds. And one of our big challenges is really getting the agencies to be able to implement those efforts. This fall, you're going to see 2 more pretty significant pedestrian safety laws. They're going to be moving forward to the council. And then our next step after we pass that is in getting them funded, getting them implemented. But it's an area where I've spent a lot of my time and focus. Ever since the mayor announced Vision Zero, we have not seen pedestrian deaths go down. They've only gone up. And I don't think it's a space where the city is moving nearly fast enough. I think we have to move much more quickly and urgently. Everybody here knows, I mean, this is a imminently walkable neighborhood where we all get around. And it is a very significant challenge when we see that. And I know, you know, listen, I walk my kids to school and it's 1 block, and that intersection that we have to cross is a danger every morning. And it's something that I think everybody experiences, young and old and everywhere in between.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to call on Shirley and then James and then Kirsten, I'm sorry. And then I'll go to the chat. So Shirley.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Thank you, Shirley.
go
Lieutenant,
ahead.
you want to take that that second question first?
In terms of the flashers, what I would say is that a lot of these offenses are very much crimes of opportunity. They're not picking someone out. They're not directly, like they're not going, oh, I'm going to go to this block and commit this carjacking. They're very much driving around looking for someone who might be distracted. I understand the issue with the flashers. With that, I would encourage you to, I know it's really difficult, but either have a second person maybe to be able to watch your back. Because I will tell you the last robbery we had was someone unloading their groceries. Having a second person to be able to watch your back. Again, these are things that should not be necessary, but might be helpful. I wouldn't say don't put your flashers on, but I would say it's one of those things that could attract somebody, kind of like the light of somebody looking at their phone. you should be able to be on your phone in the car, but seeing somebody distracted in a car is what tends to attract some of these carjackers. To briefly address some of the gun violence and the brick incident, the brick incident was people that didn't know each other. That was a attempt robbery gone wrong. So I'm not sure in terms of that motivation. A lot of the gun violence, like the one that Councilmember discussed earlier, that was specifically a long-standing personal group beef. Some communities end up with issues with each other that are extremely unfortunate, that they've been going on so long, and that anger is built up so long, and that pain, that it becomes very difficult for them to stop that conflict. Most of those that were shot that night are people that I've dealt with when I was an officer at IFD. So they've been in that same area for a very long time. These weren't newcomers. They're people that I knew as an officer that were younger then. And unfortunately, a lot of them are out there because they don't see another alternative. And like I said, they end up with these very personal beefs, because one shooting where someone dies, then that can become a lifelong feud, where every time you look at another group, you think they killed my friend. And that's very difficult to get past, which is where a lot of the violence interrupters come in to really sit down and work through those deep-seated issues that can go back generations.
Thanks, Lieutenant. I'll try to jump in on some of the other questions that you had there as well. I guess let me address your first point, because I think, Shirley, you're completely right around, there's, it's kind of what I was talking earlier about, like the stats. So we like to share stats all the time. To some degree, they can be helpful context to things. In other cases, even if the stats are all going down and you're seeing things go in the right direction, but you experience crime, it happens on your block, it happens to somebody you know, then crime just went up for you. And so that feeling of public safety, that perception of public safety can't really be shown or be presented just in the record of the stats that we show. And Thomas Apt, who's one of the kind of the top authors and writers around public safety right now, trying to think about the different ways that cities and the country can focus on this, says very clearly, the perception of public safety, if you don't feel safe, almost nothing else matters. And so I think, to your point around making sure that everyone feels safe, I think it's a significant issue for every part of our city, including, like you said, the economics of making a choice to go out to dinner and be able to walk home afterwards. So I appreciate your point and take it there. In terms of, I'm going to kind of address the question you had around juveniles. So we've had year-to-date 316 carjackings. 67% of the arrests, so 2/3, have been juveniles. Now, what we also find, however, is that most juveniles don't commit one carjacking and call it a day. What typically happens is you'll see one individual or one group of individuals commit a large number. So I don't want you to think that 316 divided, by 2/3, and that's how many juveniles you have. It's actually a much smaller group of individuals that commit a lot of these. That's why, for example, when the regional task force that the chief put together was really, I think, very successful, and really started working across borders. Because listen, if you're going to go, commit a crime, you probably don't really care where a ward boundary is or where state. You're looking for that opportunity, right? So partnering with our regional law enforcement, our regional leaders, is the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. Now, once we actually make the arrest, so this gets to your recidivism, it's really hard to give just a general, hey, here's your recidivism rate for juveniles, because you'd have to kind of break it down into what types of offenses, things like that. But we know that when we're able to get young people into diversion programs, we have a pretty successful rate of having not reoffending. The last data we have from the Attorney General's office is something about 10 to 15% reoffend, which means about 85% don't. Now, that is, kind of to what the lieutenant said. When people have options, when people have opportunities, they're not looking to go commit that crime. And so that's another big part of this. So, again, I talk about this as that both and, right? You got to have the accountability when harm is done. You got to have that response. And we have to be able to ask the question, why did it happen in the first place? Why did a 13-year-old have a gun and decide to go do something? ask the second and third level questions, and then we start getting at those root causes. That doesn't mean we don't take the accountability for the harm that was done, but if we want to stop the merry-go-round of this, then you got to be able to ask those deeper questions and get at that. And that's where I think you're seeing partners across law enforcement and criminal justice trying to really work and pull in the same direction to help answer those and then intervene.
Great, thank you. Now, James, I'm afraid we lost a person. I hope she comes back, but James, go ahead. You need to unmute yourself first. Yep.
Yeah, I'll try to take a crack at that. And I see Lieutenant's on the phone right now, so I'll try to help answer some of that. I think, so based on my conversations with Chief Conti, with the Attorney General, with others, it is accurate to say that in terms of the arrests, there is an increase over last year. I don't know if I'd say it's the same as it was 25 years ago, but it is true though that we have seen over the last year, I think, an increase in juveniles. Now, we can't separate that from what happens when you take, a year and a half, 2 years of kids and you remove all the things that we had in place to help create that type of intervention, direct support. So the schools are done, the rec center is closed, everything else that happens. I think the Washington Post wrote an op-ed editorial just the other day. I don't know if folks who had a chance to read that, talking about the mental health and trauma that we're seeing play out from kids in schools. I work with our middle school principals, for example, all the time. All of us have been in middle school. All of us can remember middle school is a tough time in a good year. Last year, for example, every middle school principal I talked to just had an incredibly difficult time with so much behavioral health, so much mental health crisis for their students that also came in lashing out and in ways that were, unhealthy. And so I think when you kind of to your second part of your question, I think you can tie it to the lack of those connections that kind of fell apart over the last 2 years. I don't want to say that's that's the sole reason, but we certainly can't separate that. That I think is absolutely a significant contributing factor. And I think also it'll be a significantly contributing factor of the solution. We're putting a lot of investment into our schools to have stronger school-based mental health supports. We call them out of school time programs, other ways that we are trying to get at that at-risk student. We're working, for example, we have something called the leadership academies, where we have specific programs at the middle school and high school level to try to get that kid who is truant, close to failing, like all the things that should be the red flags popping that says this kid is not headed in the right direction. And we go around and help provide a lot of supports in that space. And that program, it's in 3 high schools and 3 middle schools, I believe, right now, is starting to have a lot of success as they're building and kind of rebuilding, frankly, the trusted structures that some of those kids are going to need. And that's going to be a significant part of kind of what we have to do as a city. But I do try to, obviously we're focused on what's happening here locally, and our solutions will be found locally, but you can find basically in the entire region. If you were to go have the same conversation in Montgomery County, go have the same conversation in Alexandria, the same conversation in Prince George's, you're going to be seeing everyone having the same types of conversation and experiences. So I, for example, also with another hat, sit on the Council of Governments. So I'm talking with elected leaders across our whole region to help think about what are these shared strategies? What's the experience you've got? Here's what we're trying. And that also shared, because it is a shared experience that we're having. It's not unique to the district, but obviously we have to focus on it, and our solutions are going to be found here.
Thank you, James. Wondering, Lieutenant, did you have any follow-up? You were on the phone when that question came through. We were sort of talking about juveniles. But let me, let me go to, there was one question, which is just sort of a factual question, which is, are wheel thefts considered thefts or thefts from vehicle?
Thefts from vehicle.
Thefts from vehicle.
It's sort of a subsection of thefts from vehicle, thefts of vehicle parts. So it would be in the same category of license plates, wheels, catalytic converters are another big one. And I will tell you that sort of in the, not every area, it's more around Chinatown, but we are seeing an increase in airbag thefts of all things.
Okay. And then we have a
I
question in the chat. Oh,
apologize.
I'm sorry.
I was just saying, I'm the only lieutenant working, so I apologize for taking the calls.
Yeah. That's okay. We know you're working hard. There is a question from Bill Sisolak in the comments. What are the predetermined markers that will measure the success or failure of the this and that approach? I think this is really for you, Charles. Like, how are you?
Sure.
What are you looking at as measures of success?
It's a great question that doesn't really have an easy answer, Bill, but it's a good question. And what I mean by that is, it is a very difficult thing to measure something that doesn't happen. So when MPD is able to prevent something from happening, there is no metric for that. There's no way to kind of measure that. When violence interruption programs stop a conflict between two individuals that could have escalated to a shooting, there's no way to really measure that. So we have a couple of different metrics that we try to look at. Some of them are looking at qualitative data, such as how many types of engagements did you have? What were those types of engagements? How many individuals did you get to be able to take advantage of different programs or different types of interventions? Other types of efforts we look at and say, if you take some of our violence prevention work, for example, has very targeted neighborhood specific focal points. So one way you can measure is say, all right, did we see gun violence within that predetermined geographic area decrease compared to the regions around it? And so, for example, with some of our Cure the Streets programs, we see that that's one of our measures of success when we do that. Another measure of success would be kind of what I was talking about with our Pathways programs. Take an individual who's high at risk, who has had law enforcement contacts, has been arrested, has been a victim of crime, and do we see that individual reoffend? And so do we measure those kind of reoffense rates? That's another kind of metric that we use, and you can peg that against individuals similarly situated that don't have the interventions. And so do you see an increase in or a decrease in recidivism, which is, I think, an increase in success. So we use a bunch of different metrics like that. I think other metrics are things like, community perceptions of safety, right? Like those are some of the metrics that we try to use. That's a hard thing to measure. And it's also, your perception of safety is gonna be very difficult to draw a direct line to any one of these different efforts that are going on. But it also is, again, kind of my point, if you don't feel safe, not much else matters. And so it's an important metric that we kind of keep working on. But that's, Bill, it's a great question. And it's one that gets asked frequently. It doesn't have a nice, neat answer because there's many different ways that we try to measure what the success of these different approaches are.
One thing I do want to bring up is that having a unified community that is willing to call if they see something that they're concerned about actually greatly contributes to safety. They find that like the collective efficacy, the collective spirit in the community can actually increase safety. And actually today was an example of this with the burglary. We got the call from a neighbor who'd seen this person checking doorknobs and go into this house. It was just a neighbor that was hanging out on his back porch. And frankly, if you call and it ends up being a big nothing, we're just going to come talk to the person. I got a call the other day about somebody looking into a backyard. It turned out to be the landscaper, but we just go chat with them and say like, hey, what's up? And if they tell you, landscaper, here's my business card, and they check out, we're not bothering anyone. We would way rather have the call that you think the person might be stealing the package and just have a nice conversation with them and let them on their way than not get the call and have them pick up all your packages. We don't mind coming out. Those little crimes are not a waste of time for us. I've had a lot of people apologize when they call about like nonviolent offenses. We are very much happy to come out. On our end, one of the other ways that we do measure the success is we try to look at, did the crime go down overall, or does it look like the crime moved? So my background is I have a grad degree in criminological statistics. So I'm always looking at the maps, like these strategies we're using. Did suddenly we pick up a bunch of thefts or robberies 2 blocks over, or is it going down overall in a larger area? Sort of that dispersion of benefits versus displacement of the crime. So we kind of adjust based on that. And it's going to be that overall crime number, since, as Councilmember said, we can't really account necessarily for what didn't happen, except in absence of statistics or an increased feeling of safety in the community.
I have 2 kind of follow-up questions, and I invite anybody else who has one to please, raise your hand. One question is, when I look at Nextdoor and things, I'm seeing a lot more videos and things of Ring, the Ring doorbells that are capturing images of people. How helpful is that? How useful is it for us to send you images that we capture? Or is that sort of illusory? Is that kind of not useful? I'd love to hear your feedback on that. And then just one other follow-up question here, just to sort of throw it out there, unless somebody else has another to add, is I'm really thinking, as you're talking about, how can Capitol Hill Village as a community help our members, help older adults on the Hill feel safer? And so that's really a question to everybody. What would contribute to your feeling of safety, when you're going about your business and really just trying to enjoy our community as it's meant to be enjoyed. So
I'll be super honest, even though they live in Virginia, my parents and my sisters moved down to North Carolina, I bought all of them pepper spray. I'm not saying you have to, but even in places that are safe, something could always happen.
Yeah.
If someone were to purchase pepper spray, I would recommend there's a gel kind that doesn't blow back on you. It's what we use. Yeah,
okay.
I would recommend.
I've heard that you don't want to carry
aerosol.
something that somebody could use against you, right? So if somebody takes it from your hand, so we use alarms or something. But
so that's why I personally don't recommend tasers generally, because a lot of people are afraid to hurt someone. But as I point out, pepper spray is basically like squeezing a chili pepper in their eyes. There's no lasting permanent damage. I've been pepper sprayed both by my fellow officers, by other people in the academy. I'm just fine. I can see it. It's not fun, but it helps. I think if you know that, which is why I gave it to my sisters, to take that hesitation out. You're hurting the person temporarily. You're not doing permanent damage. I think with a taser or a gun, one, the circumstances where you can use them are smaller, and 2, there's a lot more fear about, like, I don't want to hurt this person, a lot more of a block, because people are mostly nice and they don't want to hurt other people.
But what if the person who is committing the crime against you, or that you fear, just grabs it out of your hand and uses it on you?
Again, that would be one of those judgment situations. If you're right up on top of someone, it wouldn't be something to use. Okay. But a lot of them have a pretty good range of like 8 to 10 feet. Like they really go. So,
okay.
And like I said, this isn't a me the cop recommendation. This is what I did for my baby sisters, who are kind of helpless and really afraid of things, and really young in college. So, and my older parents. So that's what I got for them. In DC, the kind that's legal is the stuff that's oleoresin capsicum, which is specifically the stuff made from that chili pepper. So you're not spraying chemicals in someone's eye, you're spraying the essence of chili pepper. Again, very painful. I've seen large grown men cry. I have cried. But I was just fine afterward. I'm fine today. No lasting effects. It's just very unpleasant. And believe me, if you pepper spray someone, they are not going to steal your stuff. They will cry a lot. The other thing, you were talking about the Ring cameras. So with the Ring cameras, it's very helpful, but the one component that would also be helpful is if you guys see the person that's in those Ring camera posts, you call us. Now, maybe it's not the person, we wouldn't necessarily arrest them right away, but at a minimum, we could stop them, identify them, get a name, and see if that is the person that's doing it and connect it all together. So we can't be everywhere at once. So it is helpful for us, especially if they have some kind of very distinctive characteristic. And weirdly, a lot of people that commit crimes wear the same clothes day after day, like even when they're not homeless. I don't know why this is, but this, in my years of policing, I found that like still if somebody wearing the same kaleidoscope shirt for 3 days, even though they're not homeless and have a lot of nice clothes. It's beyond me, but especially with those very unique items of clothing, it definitely helps us. We're driving around, we're like, wow, that's a weird shirt. I think I saw that in the Ring video.
Mhm.
So I'd say they are super helpful, but adding in that component of calling us, or even there's a text number. There's an anonymous text tip number that you can send it into. You can text it to the watch commander phone number. We're very receptive and we're happy to go contact anyone. Like I said, for us, we don't mind. We'd rather come and have it be nothing than you not be sure, not call, and then wonder. Like I would rate, personally, I'll go to calls sometimes if people are busy. I frequently do that a lot, actually. I'm perfectly happy to stop, have a good chat with somebody. Most of the time, especially if you're checking to ID someone, it's really non-confrontational. You're kind of just like, hey, what's up? You know, you're kind of looking suspicious, ripping open the package from that guy's porch. How's it going? So having you guys help us is a big portion of that. Like I said, we only have so many officers, and you guys are really the eyes and ears out here. And honestly, a lot of times you're going to be the ones that when you see something, when you feel that it's not right, it's probably not right. There's a really good book called The Gift of Fear that talks about how before a lot of people get victimized, I've experienced this personally, before I was a police officer, that they think like something's just wrong. They have like an inkling, like I shouldn't go through this alley or I shouldn't go here, like something's just off. And I highly encourage people to go with that instinct. You never know what you save yourself from. Or like I said, if you're looking out your window and you're just like, something's wrong with that car, like that woman seems like she's in distress, call us. The worst thing that happens is we have a nice conversation with somebody.
Charles, did you have a comment too? Yeah.
I did. First, let me do the cameras, and I'll come back to the other piece. So probably about 5 years ago, I actually created that camera rebate program. And it came on the heels of we had experienced in Ward 6 a significant increase in basically sidewalk armed robberies that were taking place. And I met with neighbors. I think that summer I had something like 35 living room meetings, talking with neighbors who were on edge and scared, but we were looking for different solutions. And we ended up creating this. And to date, it has funded more than 10,000 camera rebates in the city, which is actually, I think, very significant. I have seen it close. It's helped investigations, everything from package thefts to homicides. If you remember, there was a homicide back, this is many years ago, but it was a horrific homicide on 14th Street Northeast in the basement. Where there's a young woman packing up her car going back to North Carolina. And there was a camera that was up the block that actually led to being able to identify the individual. And then there were other pieces of evidence, obviously, but that was one of the kind of key pieces that placed that person, right? So we know that this is a tool that has been helpful and useful. I would say one of the things that I am trying to work with MPD on, though, is I get constantly people email me saying, hey, I've got this Ring video of what just took place. What do I do with it? I'm like, all right, send it to me. Then I send it to the commander, and the commander says, like, the level of email chains that have to happen to get it into the right hands is too long. And what I think we want to do, especially now that it exists so much, is be able to have a way that I get this all the time. People ask me, can I just upload it like on the MPD website? Is there a place where I could take this thing, either tie it to a report number or something else, and be able to get that into the right hands rather than having to kind of pass it along through this chain of people? So I think that's one of the things we've got to have a bit of an evolution around how to do this. But for anybody who is not taking advantage of this, please do so. It is a very useful tool. The other thing I would ask is please check the batteries. The number of times that and I see the lieutenant shaking her head, the number of times I talk with detectives or others who they're canvassing a block after a robbery, after something, and they see the cameras and they go up and they're like, ooh, yeah, I forgot to change the batteries.
He gets super excited and then super sad too.
Yeah.
We'll be like, oh my gosh, the camera's got the perfect angle. This is gonna
Yep.
be great. And then they're like,
Mhm.
Yep. So please check the batteries. Judy, if for anybody who doesn't have one, we can make sure we get you the link so that you know how to be able to sign up for that.
Sure.
Short version here. It basically will give you a rebate of $500, which essentially covers the cost of most home systems. The deal you have to make is it's got to be a certain type of quality, which most systems these days are. And then you have to agree that if MPD comes and knocks on the door and asks, can we see that video, that you will collaborate with them. It is not a live, so I also have this concern that people ask me, that it is not a live feed. MPD is not able to monitor in live real time, things like that. It's a investigative tool after something has happened, but it can also have a, preventive effect. All right, on the other side, and I'm going to take a slightly different tack than the lieutenant did. Listen, if you want to carry pepper spray, if that gives you greater confidence, I'm not going to say don't do it. But last week I was just on the phone, the neighbor of ours who was attacked at the car, where the young person ran up with a brick, hit her in the back of the head, trying to either steal something she had or get the keys to the car. There's no pepper spray that she was going to have in her hand that would have stopped that. That was a crime of opportunity, which most of these things are, where an individual saw somebody and said, I'm going to move fast. I mean, came from behind, all that. There was never an opportunity to use the pepper spray. And to the questions around, like, could a tool perhaps be used against you? I think that's real. And so I want to be just kind of careful around that. I think that, to your question, Judy, about how does Capitol Village specifically help us create and maintain a better and more safe community? I think conversations like tonight are part of that. I think where we're able to come together to talk about, here's what's happening in our community. I want to hear what steps you are taking, but also help get, some of my questions answered. What are some of the different strategies I want to have? I think that's an important part of it. I think collectively having a sense of none of this should ever be normalized, ever. It should never be normal that a 13-year-old has a gun in their pocket. It should never be normal that a woman has a brick hit up against the back of her head. It should never be normal. And that means you helping hold me accountable, helping hold Lieutenant accountable, helping hold all of us to say, this is not acceptable. And then we collectively hold each other accountable for that. I think that's an important part of helping build the community, ensure the community that we all want. I also want us to be very thoughtful, though, also about, and I absolutely respect where the lieutenant was coming in terms of, hey, give us a call so that we can come help a situation. I do want us to also, though, be thoughtful around when it is we're going to call 911 and when we're not. I think that, it's always a delicate balance that we're trying to strike to make sure that we're knowing when the right moment is to call, but also we know we're trying to think through about how we're making sure that we don't create unintended interactions. Listening to the way that Lieutenant Mulrooney speaks, listen, I got 100% confidence when the lieutenant rolls up on a scene. She is handling that with respect and dignity and going into that conversation to work on that. But we also know, as we've all been part of a conversation for a long time, about how it is we make sure we talk about what does policing look like today, how are we working on that. And so I just want to make sure we have that conversation in the context of our conversation around how we are utilizing our tools. I will say it gives me a lot of confidence when I hear Lieutenant Mulrooney speak about how she then gets her officers to go out and do that type of engagement. That's what we want. That's what we're all aiming for. And so I really appreciate that. I just want us to kind of keep that in the context of our minds around how exactly we want to make sure when we're engaging, when we're calling versus overcalling, because our 911 call volume has just, the curve has been like this for years and years and years and years. And it does start to put a strain on the overall system. But we also want to be thoughtful about when it is we're trying to create those interactions.
Two
again,
final
like
things. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like I said, if you don't want to call 911, a lieutenant has the watch commander phone. If it's something that you want to make sure is like a supervised interaction, that phone is specifically only with the commander of the watch, which is going to be a lieutenant or a captain. The other thing, sort of piggyback off what the council member said, as a community, looking out for each other is also something huge. Again, nothing of this should ever be normalized, but it only takes a second to kind of step out and watch out for your neighbor while they're changing a tire or something. I mean, I think changing a tire is an extremely vulnerable situation because you're so focused on what you're doing. Nothing would have prevented that hit with the brick. There was nothing, no tool, no help. The only thing that maybe could have helped is if there was been someone there to at least shout a warning, but still, it was all so fast, and some of these kids are so quick. Nothing was going to help with that. But occasionally having extra people there can deter something, not always. But having cameras, having extra people, occasionally somebody takes a second thought, like, do I really want to deal with 2-3 people? Even if you're just like doing nothing, looking out your window, just checking up on somebody doesn't hurt.
Yep.
And then one final thing, which I know it's on a lot of people's minds, this goes sort of takes us in a different opposite direction now, but scooters on the sidewalk.
What's a
There's
meeting
nothing-
without scooters?
It's almost as scary as having somebody getting carjacked, as having somebody right up behind you on a no. Is it legal to ride a scooter on the sidewalk?
Nope.
So, no. Long and the short, no. You can't ride the scooters. The electric scooters, especially like the full-size mopeds, 100% should not be on the sidewalks. They could hit and run people over.
I think the question was about the lift shared scooters.
Yeah, those aren't supposed to be on the sidewalk either. I mean, the scooters actually have emblazoned on them, do not ride on sidewalks.
Okay.
I mean, just yesterday, I was chatting with 2 neighbors out on my own sidewalk, and all of a sudden there's a woman who's coming down the sidewalk, goes ding, 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 and just goes right through our conversation on a scooter. I'm like, you're not supposed to be on that. But yeah, you're not supposed to be.
So Charles, what did you do? What do you do?
Well, part of it is changing the culture of how obviously people are riding. We've tried everything from, emblazing it on there. When people rent them on their phones, it pops up like that. I'm not gonna call 911 for the person who's on the sidewalk, right? Like that's not what we're looking for, but it's changing that expectation and setting in the same way that, I think we have bad operators of vehicles, of bicycles, of scooters across the board. It is a constant work on how to get everyone to be using this in the right way. And all it takes is one bad experience, right? Like I see people riding scooters legally and correctly all the time. One person rolls up on a sidewalk, passes by somebody like what happened to me yesterday, and what's probably happened to every single person here. And it leaves a bad impression for everything.
I think one of the things we have to realize though is that, that some of these things that younger people can kind of take in stride, a fall for an older adult, broken bone or something can often be the beginning of a downward spiral health-wise. Yeah. And so, while it might be a minor annoyance for a younger person, it can be pretty dangerous for people. So I just, I think coming up with a solution, not 911, but something that we can be more proactive about.
I think social pressure, because I mean, the thing is that I'd be very careful with calling people out. But if it's somebody that they're your neighbor, you keep seeing them, they're riding on this scooter by you. I mean, having a conversation with them, that's going to be a lot more embarrassing getting called out. Now, obviously, it's not always going to work, and I'd really only advocate that with, like I said, your neighbors. Like you see someone, you're like, they live 4 doors down. You almost hit me with a scooter. Like, come on. Right. I know we actually had that conversation in my townhouse complex. We had somebody that was literally riding their bike up and down the sidewalk and almost ran over some dogs and hit people. And we all kind of came out and were like, really now?
Yeah.
And they since haven't come back. In terms of the non-911 solution, if they're not listening to the apps, a lot of that's going to be making it more normal socially to not do that.
As Mary, I'm sorry to interrupt, but as Mary just pointed out, DDOT has different information from what you just shared. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Well, they're not supposed to be on sidewalks.
No,
but the other piece is on technology.
Not true. Right. That is not true.
You want them on the sidewalks or you don't? I'm sorry.
No.
No, that they're legally.
may I say something? On the October 1st, 2021 law absolutely allows e-scooters to be on sidewalks except in the central business district. It is legal. I think it is personally a gross violation of ADA. And the district and DDOT is in fact going to very likely increase the number of scooters. They are currently assessing the effect, but I've got a very strong suspicion they're going to say, oh, no problem. We'll just, allow thousands more scooters. I
Yeah.
think they are an outrage
Yeah.
to seniors and people with disabilities.
I do think, I would say, I think there's a lot of people that do enjoy them, but we do have to be aware that it's a differential. There's a differential between the risk to somebody, so.
When
Maybe
was
we
the
can
last,
hand-
when was the last time you saw somebody 50, even 50 or over riding an e-scooter?
Oh, I've seen people.
Yesterday?
I have, yeah.
Today?
Yeah. So Charles, listen, it's after 8. I want to be respectful of your time and Lieutenant's time and everybody else who joined us. I thought this was a great conversation. Thank you so much to everybody for coming and participating, and to our guests for answering our questions as openly and honestly as they can. And I look forward to hopefully having more of these conversations. And we will continue this, there's a couple of questions that I think we can continue to discuss, and I hope that we will.
Absolutely. Well, Judy, thank you so much for helping convene this and coordinate this. And Lieutenant Mulrooney, I know you're the watch commander tonight, so thanks for making so much time to join the conversation too. Really appreciate it.
Happy to.
Yeah, and appreciate your team, Charles, for helping us arrange this as well.
Yep.
All right. Good night, everyone, and
Bye.
thank you.
Good.
Night. Thank